So friends, it's not just the judges who are standing up to Donald Trump's lawlessness. It's also the citizens. Citizens serving as grand jurors, and in recent days, 12 citizens who served as trial jurors. So let's be clear. Whether it's 7 million people in the streets of America or 12 people sitting in a wooden box in a courtroom in Washington, D.C., it is the people who have the power. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, as you all know, Donald Trump has found several flunkies to serve as U.S. attorneys. Whether it's Elena Habba, who has become New Jersey's nightmare, or Lindsay Halligan, the queen of vindictive prosecutions, or former Fox TV host Janine Pirro. Now, friends, you may recall some reporting from a couple of months ago about how people who were getting arrested in Washington, D.C. for allegedly interfering with law enforcement efforts like immigration operations, they had been using their cell phone cameras to record what was going on. Sometimes they would be involved in some pushing or shoving incidents, allegedly with police. Famously, one really angry D.C. resident who also happened to be a paralegal at the Department of Justice got so frustrated at, military members being deployed to the streets of D.C. that he threw a Subway sandwich at a police officer. So all of these minor incidents, Janine Pirro thought should be 8-year felony crimes, even though the evidence clearly didn't support that. So Janine Pirro would send prosecutors into the grand jury, and time and again, grand jurors, sitting as the conscience of the community, said, "Oh, hell no, we are not indicting felony crimes based on this kind of incident, this kind of evidence. Go away, Janine." So the grand jurors, again, sitting as the conscience of the community, told Janine Pirro no over and over and over and over again. At least 8 times grand juries refused to indict felony charges. It may be far more than 8 times by now since the last reporting. But Janine Pirro doesn't seem to be willing to take no for an answer. Janine, no means no when the grand jury tells you no, you don't have the evidence to bring a felony charge. So with respect to one defendant in particular, a woman named Sydney Lori Reid, she was out there protesting some immigration enforcement operations. She was videoing what was going on with her cell phone, and an ICE agent and an FBI agent were at the D.C. jail, outside the D.C. jail, and they were about to take somebody into custody for immigration purposes after that person was released from the D.C. jail. And the allegation is Sydney Lori Reid got in between them. There was some pushing and shoving. She was alleged to have kicked one of the officers. And the grand jury who sat in judgment of that case said no, not once, not twice, but 3 times to Janine Pirro. No, we are not indicting a felony charge based on this bullshit. So what did Janine Pirro do? She had one of her prosecutors bring a misdemeanor criminal charge, a much lower level criminal charge than the 8-year felony. She repeatedly tried to, twist the grand juror's arms to indict. And just to dive down into the legal weeds for a minute, a felony charge in the courts of D.C. can only be brought by a grand jury, but a misdemeanor charge can be brought by the prosecutor. All the prosecutor has to do is sign a complaint, and the criminal case has commenced. So that is what Janine Pirro did to Sydney Lori Reid. And guess what? Late last week, that case went to trial. And 12 jurors sitting in a wooden box in a courtroom in Washington, D.C., found Sydney Lori Reid not guilty. And they did it in less than 2 hours. They barely had time for a coffee break, never mind lunch. Once they retired to deliberate in less than 2 hours, they firmly repudiated the prosecutorial overreach and abuse represented by that misdemeanor case being brought by U.S. Attorney Janine Pirro. So let's turn to the new reporting, and then we'll tackle a couple of takeaways. This from HuffPost. Headline, D.C. woman accused of assaulting agent during ICE encounter found not guilty. Prosecutor Janine Pirro failed to secure a felony indictment against the woman 3 times, then lost a jury trial on a misdemeanor charge. Ouch. Ouch indeed. That article begins. A Washington, D.C. woman accused of assaulting a federal agent was found not guilty by a jury on Thursday, the latest embarrassment for Janine Pirro, President Donald Trump's U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia. Prosecutors had alleged Sydney Lori Reid kicked a Federal Bureau of Investigation agent during an altercation outside the D.C. jail in July. Reid had been filming Immigration and Customs enforcement officers while they were detaining a man who'd just been released from the jail. Pirro's office tried 3 times to indict Reid on a felony assault charge, but D.C. grand juries declined to return an indictment each time, a highly unusual occurrence that suggested the flimsiness of the government's case. Flimsy? That's a case that should have never been brought, and friends, presenting it 3 times to a grand jury and being no-billed 3 times, I consider abuse of the grand jury process. I consider it prosecutorial overreach. In my decades appearing before grand juries in Washington, D.C., I never had a single case no-billed. Never once did I have a grand jury tell me, look, Assistant U.S. Attorney Kirshner, you don't have the goods here. We are not going to return the indictment you are seeking. Never once. You know why? Because I didn't present bullshit cases to the grand jury, nor did my colleagues. So, flimsy, I would use other words. All my editorial edition. The article continues. After whiffing on the felony counts, prosecutors ended up trying Reid on a misdemeanor charge of assaulting or impeding a federal agent, but they couldn't even win that case. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours on Thursday before returning the verdict of not guilty, WUSA 9 reported. The defendant, Sydney Lori Reid, in a statement through her attorneys, said the verdict shows that this administration and their peons are not able to invoke fear in all citizens. Quote, I feel sorry for the prosecutors, really, who must be burdened by Trump's irrational and unfounded hatred for his fellow man, she said. Knowing that I can stand in front of 12 of my fellow citizens and be found not guilty for standing up for basic human rights makes me feel like, despite the scary times we live in, we have hope for the future. Sydney Lori Reid just said it all, didn't she? Knowing that I can stand in front of 12 of my fellow citizens and be found not guilty for standing up for basic human rights makes me feel like, despite the scary times we live in, we have hope for the future. And friends, if I can add to those compelling words spoken by Miss Reid, whether it's 23 people sitting in a windowless grand jury room, 12 people sitting in a wooden box in a public courtroom, or 7 million people marching in the streets of America against Trump's tyranny, it is the people who have the power. So friends, let's roll, because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.